Oh, we okay. All right, welcome back to where are we at? Episode 6. I don't even know where we are. Of DNT,
Seven.
a 7 maybe? Well, we'll find out.
I don't know.
Anyway, this is going to be why am I always introducing it? Well, I'll finish anyway. This is going to be the Odyssey episode. Yes, we talk about movies too, like we talked about Obsession before. And now we're going to talk about the Odyssey because A, it's really popular right now in the national consciousness, but also B, since I happen to be an ancient historian, something near and dear to my heart, who also happens to study reception of ancient history in things like film. Uh, and we went to see it yesterday, was it? That we thought we'd talk a little bit about it.
Was it? No, it was 2 days
Oh,
ago.
2 days ago. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, whatever. It's all
Yeah.
the same.
So wait, actually, before we go, you might notice I have a little boo boo here on my face. That's from Ty elbowing me in the face and
Did you just call
splitting,
it a boo-boo?
splitting, yes, splitting. I don't know what else to call it.
Did you just call it, bro?
Splitting open
Grown
my
man
face
pushing
with
70,
with
by the
his
way.
elbow while we were playing one on one in basketball. That's what our basketball games are like. But at any rate, so Ty, what were your impressions or anything you wanted to say about it to get the ball rolling?
I liked the Odyssey. I liked Christopher Nolan's take on it. I like how he adapted to a very modern theme, a modern moral of the story. But and you said this kind of on the car on the way back. Like the original Odyssey is timeless in a way. Like the character study will always be timeless. But I do like how he adapted into kind of an anti-war story. There's spoilers, by the way. I don't know why.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
of course, there's
obviously there's
spoilers, right?
spoilers. But yeah, like yeah, I kind of like how he made it into an anti-war thing a little, try to say something about the world today, as opposed to, like a take that the ancient Greeks might have had. But I understand people who are very frustrated because I do feel like he took out parts that like don't really make sense to take out. I mean, there's a lot of it where I get like, okay, you're truncating a giant piece of literature into a movie that can't possibly be that long if you want to show everything thoroughly. But at the same time, there's a lot of parts that show, kind of the whole reason Odysseus is a hero, right? His brains, his cunning, his, kind of aptitude that they just kind of totally, cut out. And I think that really gutted his character and kind of the story of transformation. And like you said, refining or, rediscovering yourself that I think make the Odyssey. I feel like if you wanted to make an anti-war story, there were other mediums to do that. But I don't know. I still think it was a really, beautiful movie in the sense that he did put together such, ancient parts of Greek myth and, he's a great director. So it looks good.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, I'll start out by saying too that I yeah, overall, I would say I like the film. I guess there's two things I want to say up front though. Besides that, and one is that when we talk about spoilers, this is an ancient work of literature, of storytelling, myth, whatever you want to call it. That if you're I know culturally aware, you kind of know this story already, right? So there really shouldn't be any spoilers, and that's one of the things that the ancient Greeks did with their myths is that they would retell these stories, and everybody knew kind of the basic story and kind of knew how things would probably end or should end. And so they weren't as into suspense as we are. They knew, what was going to happen more or less at the end of the Odyssey. They knew what would happen with the Oedipus story. They knew what would happen to Agamemnon when he returned to Mycenae or Argos, whichever city you want to say he was from. And so that wasn't the point of the story to surprise you with some twist ending, although they could do little twists and turns here and there, their own take on it. The idea was how they told the story, what parts of it they wanted to emphasize and bring out, right? And yeah, there could be twists, there could be some changes, but they usually be subtle, not always, but usually. So I just want to get that out that they use these myths as kind of an artist palette that they could then kind of reshape a little bit in their own way, and they would retell them over and over with these slightly different tellings. So what's happening right now, and I'll say this as a historian, although I'm very well aware of when a modern filmmaker or any modern cultural presentation of some ancient story or ancient history is retold today, when they deviate from the ancient tellings of the stories. Um, on the one hand, sometimes it can bother me when they do that if it's egregious or fundamentally changes things in a way that I don't like. But at the same time, I also appreciate the fact that it's okay to. There's no law that says you can't change the story or bring out something new in it. After all, the ancient Greeks, the Romans who took up the Greek myths, they did the same things with them. This has been done ever since these stories have been handed down, that they've been reshaped and reinterpreted, etc. So I'm all good with that.
Yeah.
That's fine. So yeah,
I think there's a beautiful thing in that he's telling the myth of the Odyssey, the folk tale of the Odyssey, not the historical account of, X event, right? Obviously, the Odyssey was not a historical event, but like, for example, a movie that, I have a ton of hatred for is Ridley Scott's Napoleon, where it's like, there, it's not a myth, it's not a folklore, it is quite literally a person's life who did exist, who we do have a lot of, historical records and accounts for, and he totally has his interpretation of it, which just actively gets a good portion of the history wrong and depicts it in a way that I think is totally unfaithful to what we know about the actual living figure Napoleon. And so I think, to your point, it's nice at least that yeah, he can retell the myth and change some parts of it so that they aren't necessarily exactly how it might have been told in ancient Greek times, you know um because it's a myth, because it's not like you're retelling a story that everybody knows, because that's actually how it went down in history.
well, see that now you've dragged me into a whole thing
Yeah.
about in reception studies. There's a big deal about historical accuracy, right? And most scholars who do reception studies, they don't care about historical accuracy because that they're more interested in the creative ways that modern reinterpretations of these old stories, whether it be myths or actual historical events, in their retellings, whether they're faithful to those ancient accounts or not. And I'm a little, I take a ground on that. I'm okay with reinterpretations. I'm okay with some simplifications and so forth. That like Ty said, the Odyssey is a long story, and there's no way you're going to get everything in there in even a 3-hour movie. So that's fine.
I saw people who were so mad about
Yeah.
the Lotus Eaters not being in there.
Yes.
Bro, like, is that
Well,
really that
Well,
necessary?
the Phaeacians aren't in there either, which is he spends a lot of time there on the Scheria, their island. That's where he's retelling some of these stories, or we get some of his backstory and what had been going on in his voyages and in the Trojan War. Uh, but so, like I said, I take a middle ground. So on the one hand, I'm okay with reinterpretations or bringing to light new stuff, as long as I think Oliver Stone said it well, since he made a lot of historical movies. He said that, yeah, I got to simplify. I'm going to change things around for dramatic effect and to bring out certain things I want to bring out. But as long as I stay true to the fundamental truths of the history, like the ultimate takeaways, are things that can be justified by the real history, even though I've made some changes, then he feels that he's stayed true to history. So, and I think I would agree with that. I'm cool with that. And I think Ty doesn't like Napoleon. I hate the movie 300 and the graphic novel as well. And that's not to say that I don't think the film is a great film. The graphic novel is a great graphic novel in terms of their artistry, their creativity, and their effectiveness as entertainment. But from a historical perspective, since that was actual history, or at least we know some of it, we can feel pretty confident it is actual history. It deviates in such a way that the ultimate takeaways from the history, I think, are false, and moreover, they justify a current political agenda, which I don't happen to agree with. So I think it can actually be dangerous, and I think it's actually true also with even with myth or fictional stories in a way, because the Odyssey, has a certain gravitas, a certain cachet, I guess you'd say,
I was
something
gonna
like
say
that.
it's
Right, right. That people
got the
think,
Odyssey street
it's
cred.
not. They know it might not be real. I mean, there's monsters and witches and things, but it has a certain like almost a power of history because it's an old story that's been told so many times that people expect a certain amount of faithfulness, we'll say, instead of accuracy, to the ancient accounts. I won't say the original accounts because it was retold many times. Um, and if you do deviate too far from that, well, then yeah, is that okay? And then it's
Yeah,
especially
that's a good point.
yeah. What if I could just one more thing? Why are you deviating from it? Right? If it's to put forth some agenda, some take on modern life that is really, at least to me, not good, like justifying some horrible war or something like that, then I have a real problem with that because it does give a false impression to an audience that might not know all the details of the facts that history or these ancient stories justify a current take on events that it doesn't. Right? That's
The
problematic.
slippery slope fanatics
Yeah.
would get you with that one
Yeah.
because you might agree with the
I
agenda,
know.
but
I know.
one
I
man's
get it.
freedom fighter is another man's terrorist.
I totally get
Um,
that. I totally get that. Yeah.
but I think you have a good point there, which is that yeah, even though I feel like it being a myth, the Odyssey being a myth, gives Christopher Nolan a little bit more
Sure. Yes.
leniency with with kind of changing the story a little bit to support a theme that might not have necessarily been the exact one that the ancient Greeks would have parroted. I do think that yeah, like as I think about it, it definitely does need to have some faithfulness to that script, because it is trying to follow in the footsteps of a story that is so classic and timeless and that everyone knows. I think it's different. It'd be like making a movie on the Great Gatsby and then you watch it and it's like totally like not
No. No.
it's like glazing capitalist like a high in life. Like
Right.
that would be weird. You'd be like,
Well,
oh wait,
well, see, but it can be more serious than that
yeah,
because when I teach this stuff, I mean, think about movies about Jesus, right? People are okay with you changing the story of the Odyssey. They're okay with you even changing the history of the Battle of Thermopylae, right? And the 300 Spartans. But what if you change the Jesus story and you do like Nikos Kazantzakis and Martin Scorsese and you do the Last Temptation of Christ and you change the Jesus story or even hypothesize a possible alternate Jesus history that the movie and the book don't even say actually happened, but it was what would have happened had Jesus given into temptation. Christians were up in arms about that
yeah.
movie, right? How dare you change the true story of Jesus, right? As told in the Gospels. So all of a sudden it becomes all really serious, when you're talking about Jesus now, but it's okay with the Odyssey, or it's okay with the Battle of Thermopylae, or it's okay with Napoleon or Nixon or whoever you're going to make a historical film about, right?
That's a good point. And
Hey,
I would
yeah.
say the same thing about, like later movies on original IPs. Like I don't know why the first thought that came to my mind was the three most recent Star Wars, like the three most recent main trilogy Star Wars
Right.
movies because they have all the offshoots and stuff. I'm not talking like Rogue One or Solo or any of that, but like Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker. I remember their names. But
I tuned out a long time ago on the Star Wars films.
yeah, like I would say that people were like outraged with those three too, including myself. And that I mean, that's a totally fictional story, not an ancient classic like the Greeks wrote, but still, I feel like you if you're directing those movies, you do have some obligation to be faithful to the intent of the original Star Wars movies and to the the universe that the original Star Wars
Even if
movies
you would do
created.
reboots that are parallel tracks, or what do they call it? Alternate universes, right?
Yeah, like Next Generation,
Right.
Star Trek. Yeah, I think still you have to have some faithfulness to the original trilogy. Even there, it's something so detached from, what I think people would call is serious history or serious, mythology. Because yeah, in the three latest movies, I mean, they were totally unfaithful to the original IP in so many ways, and it kind of ruins the rest of the IP when you
It
look
can
back
be,
on it.
yeah, it can be jarring. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because it's like you look at things like at least in the world of the Jedi, it's like you have all these powers that suddenly exist in like the last three movies, right? Like, oh, Palpatine comes back to life.
Right.
Oh, Leia has like Force invincibility or some like ridiculous, when she got like blown out of a spaceship and like just survived miraculously. And it's like, well, what the hell were those Force powers when
Right.
other things of similar caliber were happening in the original three movies,
And
right?
then, and that's the funny thing when it comes to all what we're talking about here. people have different views. That some people are just hypersensitive to those changes. Other people say no, it's good, and they can. It's creative. It's not real anyway. They can do whatever.
Yeah.
But it varies. But it's not either or, right? And I say that to my friends who do reception studies because there are a lot of audience members out there actually care about historical accuracy, even if scholars don't, in these retellings of these old stories. But back to the Odyssey then.
Yeah.
So that's a kicking off point for one thing about that. When I saw the trailers for it and I saw the costuming, the armor they were wearing and everything, I was like, oh my God, I don't know if this is going to be any good. That looks so bad. I mean, not only was it not historically accurate for Bronze Age, armor, but I thought it looked cheesy. But the thing is, and this goes for the casting choices too, right? With all the uproar with these racist complaints about, oh, you can't cast a black woman as Helen and blah blah blah, and it's when I was watching the film, I didn't notice these things at all. It didn't matter what their armor looked like. I don't care what the color of the skin was or any of the characters. It did not matter. They were the characters, right? And armor is armor. Does it really matter, right? If it's period correct. In this case, I don't think it did it. If the armor was an actual important factor in the story, right? Like whether they want to battle or not or something like that, then maybe it would matter. But here it doesn't. It's just what they're wearing, I mean,
I half agree with you, and I half don't, right? Because in a lot of the sense, I do agree with you. Because I think that the casting conversation was obviously way blown out of proportion, as it usually is with this kind of thing. And it's like, dude, who cares if Helen of Troy is black?
Well, apparently Elon Musk does, so much so that I just saw a headline where he's threatening now to fund an AI version of the Odyssey that's going to be white supremacist correct or whatever the hell.
I've seen there are hella memes circulating on like Instagram and shit that's like it's like Helen of Troy, AI, generated like most beautiful, and she's got these like gigantic tits. I was like, what the fuck is that? It's like totally. But my point is that in those cases, like it's just racist parroting remarks about how, it takes me totally out of immersion when I see there's suddenly the guy next to Odysseus is an Indian man. What the hell is it? It's like, who cares? I did not care about that at all watching the movie. And, realistically, the people in that time were probably darker skinned than our general actors anyway. But speaking of that,
I mean, right.
But, I go and talk to my friends about it. Like I just mentioned, I talked to a couple of my friends just a couple of hours ago at a pool party about the Odyssey. And one of them actually mentioned how Tom Holland, of all people, looks out of place. And I kind of agree with it in a way where it's like, yeah, generally, I don't think the casting matters that much. But Kenji had this take when we finished watching the Odyssey that Zendaya didn't really fit as Athena. And I agree with that in the sense that
I do too, not because her ethnicity or race or anything. It's just Athena is this warrior, powerful goddess. I just don't see Zendaya as Athena.
Well, and it's not just that, it has less to do with Zendaya, I think, than how they portray her specifically in the movie. She's kind of dressed in almost like, you kind of feel like you're back in Dune for some reason. She's in like the shawl and stuff, which is cool. Except as Athena, I always picture Athena in the armor, with the, kind of the Lady Liberty look,
But I think in the story, she's in various disguises, not necessarily, she's not showing up in her armor.
And that makes sense. But I think the point still stands that my point wasn't so much that she needs to be in the armor, but more that the armor is a signifier that she is the warrior, And again, the point being that Zendaya doesn't necessarily, it's not that something about Zendaya doesn't make her look like a warrior or look powerful enough. It's just the way that they picture her makes her look especially like slender and kind of
she's not tall enough, because if you know the story of how Pisistratus, the tyrant of Athens, was able to come in and seize control of the city once, he actually had the tallest woman in Athens dress up as Athena to usher him in on a chariot, as if Athena was bringing him in and sanctified his, and she was said to have been like extraordinarily tall. And by the Greek measurements, she's something like 5'8". So it's kind of funny, but anyway, I'm extraordinarily tall. And so casting, well, now that you bring that up too. So yeah, when it comes to Telemachus, I don't have too much problem with Holland because he's supposed to be a young man. He's not quite confident and sure of himself yet. So
Well,
coming
yeah, I was
across
gonna,
so
my
coming
friend's
across
problem.
as boyish, I'm okay with that.
My friend's problem with him was that he looks too modern,
Yeah.
like, Tom Holland has a face that's like well, first of all, you immediately think of Spider-Man, right, Peter
Yeah.
Parker, but it's kind of a face of, like, modernity and, like,
Mm.
well-kempt, proper hygiene. It's like, oh, a
Well,
character
he
out of
is a prince.
ancient Greek
Yeah,
times,
yeah,
should be a little
right,
more rugged, and I kinda
right.
feel that.
I get that, but I'm not thinking about Matt Damon because I guess at some point we'll say more about the film in general. We're kind of in some of the weeds here, but
Yeah.
Matt Damon, it kind of goes back to what Ty said, which it was one problem. See, although okay, let me just say, I think the film was good, but it wasn't great. I wouldn't give one of those glowing critical reviews, all time classic, great. I'd say it's good. It's worth watching. I liked it,
I
but
agree.
I think it could have been better. And one of the ways what Ty mentioned before is that I don't get the sense that Odysseus is really clever and crafty in the movie. He's a kick-ass warrior, as he shows in the end, taking on countless suitors all by himself, too much by himself, if you go by the actual Odyssey, where Telemachus was much more of a fighter in that, but that's another issue we can talk about as well. But I didn't see the cleverness. I didn't see the deviousness. Yeah, I mean, maybe Nolan was trying to be a little more subtle about it, and he just has him come in disguise and give a false name, and that's supposed to show us that he's crafty. But I didn't see like the wheel spinning in his head. I didn't get that sense, and I don't know if that's Damon's acting or if it's the screenplay or the way it was directed. But I just
No,
didn't get
I
that
think
sense.
it's about the screenplay and the directing because I think the most egregious example of that, like you mentioned at the end of the film, is with the Cyclops.
So I
Like you have the whole nobody, scene in the Odyssey, which to briefly recount it, he taunts the Cyclops and tells him that his name, when the Cyclops says, "Who's blinding me? Who's blinding me?" He says, Odysseus says that his name is Nobody, so that the Cyclops calls for help amongst with the other Cyclops on the island. But when he's calling for help, they're like, "Oh, who's hurting you? Is someone hurting you?" And he goes, "Nobody is hurting me." And the clever thing is obviously that that stalls for time, and Odysseus can escape, etc., etc. And yeah, they just like totally admitted that.
I was shocked. That was, again, you have to truncate things, you have to whatever. Why that was kept out? Because that to
It takes
me,
like 5 seconds,
right? And
you
you're
could cut something
well,
more
maybe,
minor.
but I think maybe Nolan took it out because it cluttered. Maybe would clutter the themes too much. Like you said, I think a big theme is a kind of an anti-war theme that they're destroying themselves with these wars taken too far and becoming barbaric and uncivilized, destroying their civilization. And then what comes next is the Sea People and the Dark Age and so forth. So that was one of the themes you wanted to get across. And so maybe like all these other themes, you wanted simplified and not clutter it. But the one of the ways I read the ancient Odyssey, it's an Odyssey of sort of a reassertion, a re refounding of Odysseus' own identity, and here as a hero, because he was a hero of the Trojan War, right? But then through these wanderings, and because of the punishment of Poseidon, he's reduced to he reaches his nadir basically as nobody. He's nothing. He's lost that heroic identity. People don't know who he is. He's not the hero anymore. He gets basically captive by Calypso, and he's what happened to the hero, right? And so he's lost his identity, and he has to regain that. He's rediscovered, and there's a parallel story going on with Telemachus, where he's learning what his father was, this hero, by all these stories told about his heroic exploits, and so he learns what his father is, and in doing so, he also learns what he needs to be, how he can be a worthy son and successor to his heroic father as the king of Ithaca, and be a hero himself, which he ultimately becomes, joining Odysseus in the end to slaughter the suitors and regain control of their kingdom. So it's all about that heroic identity, which Odysseus has to refound, rediscover, reassert. And the nobody is a big part of that, right? When he reaches kind of a low point in that section of the story, and that just got taken out. So
Yeah.
I know I've seen interviews with Nolan where he says, a big theme for him was the notion of just getting home, and that's in the ancient Odyssey for sure. So good, he did that. And yeah, certainly later Greek writers after Homer, Euripides, and so forth, they questioned, the nature of some of these wars. Euripides living at a time during the Peloponnesian War, which is a particularly brutal war in Greece in the 420s and so forth. And so there was some questioning about war and so forth. But Nolan, so he pushed that. That was something that he wanted to do, and he clearly wanted to make a statement about veterans coming of what war, not only what war does to civilizations and possibly our own civilization today, right? But also what it does to individuals. The people, the soldiers who have to fight and you manage to come home alive, but they're scarred, right? PTSD and so forth, and they have to reintegrate back into their old lives, right? Come home again, and then their families are messed up because of it too. It's like one of our favorite movies is The Deer Hunter, and it's kind of about what the Vietnam War did to a community and some individuals at some Western Pennsylvania town. And so okay, Nolan wanted to make a point about that, and that could be taken from the Odyssey and kind of emphasized more for today's audience. So I'm okay with all that stuff, but
Yeah,
yeah, I just
I like
yeah,
that part, but it actually I was waiting for you to bring it up
yeah.
because I think it ties into the Cyclops scene really well. And another mistake I feel like he made during this scene, which is the way in which Odysseus taunts the Cyclops, because instead of talking to him, instead of doing all that, right, in the movie he turns around and shoots the arrow at him after they've already kind of escaped. And Kenji brought this up after he finished watching the movie because I also thought it was really jarring. I think the reason for that is that it feels like in the real Odyssey, in the myth, right? It's like this moment of hubris where Odysseus is triumphed again, and he's
Yeah,
taunting as this hero is taunting the
yeah.
Cyclops like he's just better than him in every way, right? And in doing so, he kind of makes this foolish mistake.
Well, that's why he tries to reassert his heroism right there by saying, I'm actually Odysseus, right? And and that hubris is one of the reasons why Poseidon punishes him.
Exactly. But I think that that is not very well caught in the
Right,
movie.
because he doesn't do that in the movie. Yeah, he just shoots him. He
He
does.
just
There's
shoots him.
no verbal taunting.
And it's also the first time we see really Odysseus in action. And so it's this jarring moment in the movie because at first he's built up to be the hero of the Trojan War. He's so clever. He did the Trojan Wars, etc., etc. But you don't actually see him do anything clever, really. The sheep thing a little bit, but it's hard to tell who actually comes up with that idea. Like he's
Right.
part of it, but it's
Yeah. You don't get the sense that he's like figure plotting this out, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
but more importantly, it's that his character, because I believe of the anti-war theme, right? And because Nolan's trying to focus on that idea of veterans with
mhm,
PTSD, Odysseus is ashamed of what he did in the Trojan War, right? Whereas in the
yeah,
Odyssey, he's actually proud of it, right? He's
yes,
the hero of Troy, and he takes that, very much to heart. Whereas in the Odyssey, Nolan's version, he's ashamed of it. He keeps getting these flashbacks of Athena at Troy, being the one getting beheaded, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that guilt is why Nolan didn't really like. It's a confused scene with the Cyclops because he
I get
talks
what you.
about
Yeah,
a hubris,
yeah.
but in the movie he isn't really like
I get it.
proud.
I get it.
So it's weirdly, yeah, contradictory.
that's a great point. Yeah, because if from the point of the sack of Troy, he's beginning to have second thoughts about what he had done with the Trojan horse and the slaughter, of these innocent Trojans. And by the way, I thought that was the most effective scene with Zendaya as Athena when you see her as a
Totally.
Trojan woman getting her head cut off. That was good. But but of course that's not in. I don't think that's in the Odyssey, as I recall. Yeah, and but Nolan puts that in there because he wants that guilt, right? And Athena's kind of acting as his conscience in the movie, right? Not which I again, she was more of sort of a mentor and a protector in the Odyssey, not so much as a conscience. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed something there, or not remembering it well enough. But that's something Nolan plays up. So then back to your point about the Cyclops, yeah, he can't brag about it in the moment because then it's as if he didn't feel any guilt for, he's supposed to be a damaged guy at this point, just trying to survive and get home. And yeah, to have him taunting him back to the old sort of, hubris ridden Odysseus maybe that's why he took it out there. That's Yeah.
Well,
Interesting point.
but he didn't take it out enough because
Yeah.
Odysseus still shoots
Yeah.
the Cyclops, and that's why it was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like a weird moment for me because I get blinding him,
Yeah.
you need to blind him so that you can get away with the sheep,
Yeah.
but then to turn around and shoot the arrow is like
Yeah.
half the moment of hubris. But in the movie, it doesn't feel like hubris because he wasn't proud in the first place. So you just
Right.
get this weird moment of like, why the fuck did he even shoot him?
Well, just
Like,
because he's chasing them, I guess. I don't know.
But he wasn't. He was like stopped at the cave entrance and
Yeah.
got you turned
Yeah.
anyway. And the
Yeah.
worst part is they wrote Odysseus's like right hand
Yeah.
man in being like, "Yo, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, you're getting us all killed.
Right.
You know, like why are you shooting? Don't shoot him.
Right.
You know." And it's like you just shoots him anyway. And again, I get it if it's like the original Odyssey, a moment of hubris, but in the movie, it really doesn't feel like that. It
Yeah.
just feels like a moment of pure, just like
Just like on a whim, stupid.
yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
Which is just it's
Yeah.
weird to me with
Yeah.
the rest of the theming of the movie because then you have like the whole scene with Cersei where she turns his men into pigs and he doesn't get turned into a pig, and you're kind of like led to believe that he's above them in that way, right? And then
Right.
similarly with the Sun God's Island where they promise not to eat the cattle, but they end up eating the cattle. And it seems like Odysseus is above that, the rest of the swine, but it's like he seems awfully along with the rest of the swine when he's shooting the Cyclops for no
Right.
reason. I'm just saying. So it's a weird contradiction, and I don't particularly like how they handled that.
Yeah.
And that's one scene in the movie.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Like I said, overall, I liked it. But yeah, these are the reasons why I don't think it's a great movie, but it's a good movie. Because I'll mention something else about the gods. And Ty has not seen the 2004 Troya, which I'm going to show him soon, because that movie pretty much eliminates the gods from the story of the Trojan War, mostly the Iliad. And David Benioff, who wrote the screenplay, said that he didn't think the modern audience could relate to him, so he was just going to cut them out altogether. I like the fact that Nolan has the gods a little more present in this Odyssey, but it's really just Athena, right? And like we said, that I don't think that worked it as well as it could have. You know what I mean? But then besides that, they mentioned Zeus and they mentioned besides Zeus and the hospitality, which, by the way, Nolan makes a big thing about hospitality because that's about the civilized life that war destroys, right? And you certainly the Odyssey focuses a lot on hospitality and that kind of civilization versus barbarism and things like that.
And I think it's the best part of the movie.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Right? It's the
But
part he does the best.
they say Zeus is that's Zeus's law, hospitality. But when you just mentioned Cersei, right, and how the reason Odysseus does not get turned into a pig like his men is because he's helped by, I believe it's the god Hermes in that episode that helps him avoid getting turned into a pig, and then actually kind of get together with Cersei for a while there, and then have her actually help them on their way. But you don't really see the gods.
I know it's so funny. It's so
involved.
funny to me that he like gets into bed with her in the actual Odyssey, and he's like, "I would never, have sex with you unless you swear." Like you said, like, do you swear something? It's like a stupid. I don't remember. Yeah.
I know that detail. I can't remember exactly what happened there, but anyway. But the idea being, so it's nice that Nolan put the gods in there more than the 2004 Troy, but he could have. And for me, I mean, you make filmmakers make whatever film they want to make, and not necessarily what I want, but it would have been nice to see more, I think, of the gods in there because, again, maybe Nolan's doing it a little more subtly. The Poseidon's causing the storms. You don't have to see his face materialize in a cloud or something like that. And that, which actually brings up another thing that I think, he did it that way in part because it's pretty clear that most of the special effects in the movie were practical effects. They did not use a lot of CGI. Yeah, the Cyclops, Polyphemus is CGI. There's some other things, but
yeah, he did look pretty bad.
Yeah, and I actually didn't think he looked very good. I thought that and he was too kind of.
Did you see what they did for him in the movie? Actually, it was like a giant puppet.
Oh,
like a multi-part puppet.
Oh well, then it wasn't as CGI.
It wasn't
as I
that
thought.
CGI.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
more
Well, it wasn't.
because it looked CGI. It kind of felt CGI.
No, they used CGI.
Yeah. Okay.
Like the puppet was in like a bunch of parts, but like they tried to do like a half practical, half CGI.
Yeah.
you know.
Well, clearly, like the hand, like grabbing that looked like a real thing. But yeah, because there seems to be a trend now for what one when CGI first came out, right? The Gladiator started this resurgence of movies set in the ancient world because you could do these big CGI things that you couldn't afford to do with practical effects and so forth. The Colosseum and gladiators and all these extras in the stands and everything, big battles, what have you. So for a while there was a lot of CGI, like the remake, the Clash of the Titans in 2010, and then the Wrath of the Titans 2012. It's like all CGI, right? But now there seems to be this backlash to that, where they want to go back to more practical effects. And most of what I saw anyway in Nolan's version is practical, which made the film feel more down to earth, which in some ways was good, even though there's a lot of kind of magical stuff in the Odyssey, right? But it's also kind of a down to earth story in a way more than the Iliad with the big battles and everything like that. The more domestic, right? But in some ways it didn't feel epic enough to me at the same time. The Odyssey is a big story. It's an epic.
So
It's
this was
yeah,
my
yeah,
major complaint about it right after the movie. Because I, at the time of watching the movie, didn't actually remember the original Odyssey very well. So I didn't have very many takes about the overall storyline immediately after watching it. The main thing that I was thinking was that, I believe, I think Nolan shot it entirely with an IMAX
yeah.
camera.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's entirely IMAX camera shot. He really intends it to be watched in an IMAX theater. There's all those complaints about how people who, can't afford to see it in an IMAX theater get to see like half of the screen because, like, unironically, half the movie is just cut off. And I agree with the complaints for sure about that. But I understand if the IMAX serves some, greater purpose, these great shots, these, Lord of the Rings style sweeping planes or whatever. There was like not a single great shot in the entire movie as far as I can
well,
remember.
great in the sense of like epic kind of
Yeah,
shots. Yeah,
I
because
don't.
yeah,
There
we're
is
yeah,
great
yeah,
cinematography
right,
in the
right,
movie,
right. Yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
But yeah, those epic shots where, like, I can think of a bajillion from Lord of the Rings, where
yeah,
you see Minas Tirith in the
yeah,
background on the
yeah.
Fëanor Fields, where it pans out and you get
Right.
this sweeping shot of the Misty Mountains, the beacons of Gondor, like there's just a million scenes like that, and you get the chills down your spine, and you're like, wow, this is a huge universe. These characters are just a small part of this giant, moving, living fantasy story. And in the Odysseus is supposed to be one of these heroes in this great mythology, but you really don't get the sense of that watching
Yeah.
the movie. Partially, I think, because those epic shots are so sparse.
Yeah. Well, and that's a funny thing because on the one hand, Nolan wanted to make a more down to earth, realistic sort of Odyssey, right? But then on the other hand, he does the IMAX thing, right? And like to be this sort of epic thing. Now I've seen some of the comparison shots they put on on the internet, like what looked like an IMAX and not. And like
Yeah.
there's the one I recall distinctly is where you see Agamemnon, part of his helmet gets cut off, and you don't see him imposing like over sort of Odysseus as the commander of the Greek forces. So yeah, I can see it makes a difference. But yeah, when you talk about those kind of like grand epic shots, like yeah, I think of like some of these older movies, from my time, like Doctor Zhivago, with the cavalry charge on the frozen lake. I mean, it's just amazing. Or cutting down that boys, those boys soldiers in the wheat field. I mean, these are just like amazing. Or Lawrence of Arabia. I'm talking these David Lean movies, these huge epic shots. You didn't get that in this movie. So
Yeah. And that was another, weird complaint about the movie, which I think is definitely less major. And it kind of comes with in the same vein as the casting stuff and to do with the armor and whatnot. But, you talked about, when you have these random inconsistencies with the original, historical and mythological based literature, like, what was the purpose?
Mhm.
And in Nolan's case, a lot of it stems from like weird modern Viking depictions.
yeah,
Like the armor is a little weirdly not Viking as in the original like historical Vikings, but Viking is in like depicted in the Vikings TV
right.
miniseries.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're back. A little cut there because my iPhone ran out of storage.
Yeah.
But what I was basically saying was that a lot of the inaccuracies in terms of costume design and setting are these weird Viking-esque mistakes, right? The setting is darker than it should be, even though they take great care to film in like the actual locations. I believe most of the movie, when they say they're in Ithaca, they are actually in Ithaca. When they're going to different places around Greece, they are in the Mediterranean region. But still, it feels like they filmed on cloudy days. They put this gray filter over it, and so the movie is just darker than you would expect for something generally set in the Mediterranean. And I get that it's stormy sometimes, or that it might be dark in some of the settings when they're sailing at night. But in general, you see the costumes, you see the setting, you see the darkness. You kind of get the feeling that maybe they are just in Scandinavia. And like you talked about earlier, when you see those inaccuracies, you try to understand why, from a filming perspective, they made them. And I just have no answer for that.
Well, I can only think that the darkness of them, because yeah, I thought it was a little dark too. And I understand that there's a lot of storms at sea and mysterious places, right? So maybe that's why he chose to do that. But yeah, it's just when I think of Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean, I think of sunny, places and blue skies and stuff. So it was a little, yeah, that I wondered about that too. And you talk about the kind of Viking feel, like with the Lystragonians with the armor. That was one of the cases where I did think the costuming I kind of jumped out at me, and I did notice it. And I thought the whole scene actually was severely truncated to the point where, like, what is it doing in there? They meet the queen and the king, and we don't know that they're cannibals and stuff. In the ancient, account, it's most people take that as a symbolic of the ultimate in barbarism, non-hospitality, non-civilized, it's uncivilized, etc. But it was, wasn't really set up or explained at all. They're just running away. This is something we talked before. There's a lot of running away in the film, and I couldn't help but turn to Ty's brother, who was sitting next to me in the theater, who I wish was here to talk with us too, but he's got other things to do right now. And I whisper in his ear, it's like, run away, because it reminded me of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, right? They're just running away a lot, which in the story they do, but in the story there's more going on, and it's something.
Yeah, exactly. It's for what you said right after it cut because of the iPhone storage was that you didn't really like the first part. Like for the first part of the movie, all of Odysseus' adventures basically until he got home to Ithaca, it was just an okay movie. It was only at Ithaca when he returned and slaughtered the suitors that it became a good movie. And I totally agree with that take. I think all of the really the emotionally impactful moments were in that last little chunk of the movie. And yeah, for the vast majority of it he was encountering these obstacles, but there was this emotional distance between us and Odysseus and his crew. And honestly, an emotional distance between Odysseus and his crew.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought it was kind of just weird the way they handled the theming with all of the Circe scene where she turns them into pigs, and the sun god scene where they eat the cattle. It's like in all of those scenes, he talks like he cares about his men, but it doesn't really feel like he cares about them. And
Yeah.
in the scene with the sea serpent, it's a sea serpent, right? What is?
Wait, are you talking about the whirlpool or
No, the sea monster that eats 6 of them. What was it? What's it called again?
No, I'm confused.
The giant, like in the movie.
You're talking about like when they go through the rocks, the Straits of Messina. They claim, okay.
What is that thing called?
Well, there's Charybdis is the word.
Yeah,
there's Scylla and Charybdis. Yeah, those two.
Charybdis,
Okay,
pretty sure.
Okay.
Right?
I think so. We might have to check our ignorance on this. But
One
anyway,
of them is the whirlpool, and
yeah,
one of them is the sea monster. But yeah, it's like for so much of the like with Circe, he's all I care about my men. With when he's talking with the undead in Hades, he's all I'm gonna defy the gods. My men are gonna get home too. Then he gets there, and it's kind of like, oh no, 6 of them get eaten. Sucks.
Yeah. Well,
I had to lie to you guys.
But again, see that. Yeah, it's again. I don't know what got cut off or what didn't. If our discussion of Penelope is on here or not.
It's not.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, because we'll get back to that in a second then, because And I don't know if this part got cut off either. I was talking about Matt Damon or the screenplays. Was that before
I
it
have no
got cut
idea.
off? Because yeah, he seems kind of very aloof in a way, right? And that could be seen, I guess, either way or received either like it's going on his head and he's got a poker face, and so you don't know what he's scheming or whatever. But I just didn't get that sense that he was really scheming and crafty and clever. And yeah, and I didn't see his connection to anybody around him really, yeah, at all. So yeah, it's right. But then if this got cut off, we do have to have with Penelope because yeah, I do think that she gave the film a little bit with Telemachus too, but mostly Penelope gave the film an emotion and a drama that I thought was lacking uh, in Odysseus for much of the film and just in all the episodes of the adventures where you didn't get that emotion and drama. It's like, yeah, you want him not to get eaten by the Cyclops, Polyphemus, but
You don't really
there
care.
wasn't an
Yeah.
emotional drama to that because yeah, some extra crewmen like Star Trek get eaten, but he's got the plot armor and he's not going to get eaten, and the way Polyphemus was depicted, he was so aloof, right? There was no, it didn't have an intimate feel of conflict and danger, and you didn't get emotionally brought into that. It's just oh wow, there's this giant monster guy and he's eating some of the dudes, but it didn't like you don't feel it, right?
And
Yeah,
Odysseus's reaction to his crew getting eaten by a cyclops is like awfully nonchalant. Like he's like, whatever, which is why it actually was kind of jarring to me when he gets to Hades and he's talking to the dead and he's like, I just want my men to get home. It's like, really?
his
Because
men or his yeah,
exactly for the whole first half of the movie, it just seemed like you were the only one
yeah.
you cared about. And
And I think that the opening lines of the Odyssey do say something about him, trying to get his men home, but because of they caused their own doom, right?
yeah,
But he tried, right? Is
yeah,
they
yeah,
were
yeah, yeah.
saying.
Yeah, and it just didn't really feel like he tried
Yeah,
in the movie so much.
but so then that brings us so really the movie picks up when he gets back to Ithaca and with Penelope because that's where you get some emotion and the
Yeah.
drama in that. It's obviously when Odysseus shows up and Argos the dog, I mean, who could not get choked up by that? My eyes got a little teary. But it's really Penelope through the whole movie who was sort of the emotional core of the film. And so when Odysseus does then reunite with her, that's when the drama picks up and what had been to me through all the adventures just kind of an okay average film turns into a good film, but still not quite enough to be great.
Yeah.
So I and I Anne Hathaway I thought did a pretty good job. I thought she overdid a little bit sometimes with the emotion, but I think overall, especially in that scene where she like kind of blows up at Telemachus, but I think overall she did a good job and gives it its emotional core.
I think she
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
did the best acting in the movie.
yeah.
And, ironically, now that you say it, I do feel like the character I had maybe the strongest emotional attachment to was the blind guy.
Oh no, I'm not. I've never been like a huge fan of John Leguizamo, but
Yeah,
I thought he did a great job
I agree.
as Eumaeus the swineherd. Yeah, he was really good. I thought he was believable. It had some emotional feeling in it,
You
right?
totally felt
Yeah,
for him,
yeah,
when
and yeah,
he's like trying to help Argos and he's
right,
getting kicked under the table by these like disgusting suitors. It's like,
exactly.
man, you feel really bad for him,
Yeah,
and he gets all beaten up. I thought he was gonna get killed by the
yeah,
bandits,
yes,
and I was like, oh man.
yeah.
Um,
No, he was. I
yeah,
thought he was good. I believe it or not, I thought Robert Pattinson, who I not into one of those Twilight movies or anything, so I never knew much about his acting. But I thought he did a pretty good job as a villain, but not a cookie cutter villain. I mean, he's a
yeah.
bad guy as Antinous, but he and he's sly. He's trying to play Penelope a bit, but he's not like entirely one dimensional. Like I guess the guy's supposed to be Eurymachus in the film, the other main suitor who's like just bad guy,
Yeah, just
mean
annoying,
guy,
yeah.
right? So whereas Antina's a little more complex than that, but still villainous. So I thought he did a pretty good job with that, and yet somewhat cowardly as well. So yeah, again, I'm fine with this. So I mean,
I know. I
yeah,
think it's so funny in the scene where Odysseus is finally slaughtering all the suitors, and Robert Pattinson's character is like standing behind a pole in the back, like
right,
the spears, grab the
right,
spears.
right, and they're supposed, yeah, they're trying to make him look cowardly,
Exactly, because he
right,
avoided, yeah, getting
right,
takes for. I
right.
mean, yeah,
Yeah, which is fine. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, he's not a good. The suitors aren't good guys in the original accounts, and so that I have no problem with that.
yeah,
But yet he's not just totally cookie cutter. There's a little more to him than that. But that brings us back to Telemachus then, because I think that's such an important part of the story. That's where the Odyssey starts. The first four books are about Telemachus, right? And it's coming of age story from him finding his identity, as I've said before, as Odysseus' son and worthy successor as a new heroic king of Ithaca. And so yeah, I was a little surprised. I don't know why Nolan chose to do this. Like why he doesn't take part in the final battle with the suitors, except to battle the one guy.
where he
You know,
almost dies too.
right. He was having a hard time
And he's like
dealing with
having a
this
difficult
dude
time. There's only one
fighting
man.
him upstairs, right? Because in the Odyssey, he's down there fighting, with the rest of the suitors. He kills several of them. So, and of course, Athena is actually involved in the battle too, deflecting arrows and things like that, because it did strain a little credulity. He's supposed to be a great hero, Odysseus, but even I remember like Ty and Kenji saying, "Man, that guy, he takes on how many of these suitors all by how many times he get hit? I thought he was dead like how many
I
times?"
know,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
I mean, and again, the thing is that Odysseus is a great hero because of his cunning. He's not Ajax, he's not
But
Achilles.
but he's a warrior
He's
too,
no,
and
he's a
that's
warrior
the
for
thing. Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah. It makes it clear in the Odyssey that he's nothing to be
yeah.
scoffed at in
Right,
terms of being a great warrior, but that's not what he's known for. Right? Again, it's
yeah,
like if Achilles takes on 30 guys and wins, it's like,
yeah,
okay, it's
yeah.
Achilles, you know. But yeah, Odysseus takes on 30 guys, you expect him to have some kind of really clever trick, and I guess with the weapons. But I mean, the suitors like ended up getting weapons anyway,
Right.
and it was like, yeah, what the hell is going on?
Well,
And because of and I was talking about this at the end of the movie. I regret the way cinematography or like cinematographers shoot action fight scenes, especially with like swords and stuff these days, because I feel like the camera is so shaky. Like I get it, it gives you a sense of the chaos of the fight, and you're in there in the weeds, and you're jerking around with the characters. But sometimes, man, especially when it's dark like that, you do not really know what's going on. And
well,
my brother and I were talking about this. Like, we could not tell how many times Odysseus actually got stabbed because it looked like 20 times there was a spear like going right into his thorax area, but he was kind of wiggling out of the way. And it was like, wait, did he dodge that? Did he just get
well,
nailed in the
that's why
side?
in,
Like,
in the in the ancient story, Athena's helping him,
yeah,
right? And of course, and so is Telemachus, right? And so Eumaeus, and I think there's another like herder who's helping him too, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that it reminded, he looked like Jason Bourne. He was like doing all the like the fighting was a little too modern, I think, in some ways, but
yeah.
okay, I'm more into the themes, the story, the character, and on that base, it's good. But coming back to Penelope and Odysseus now, it just crossed my mind. So he gets recognized by Euryclea, the old nurse, by the scar on his leg. Um, and then he strings the bow, he fires it through the axes, he kills all the suitors. It's at that point where in the movie, that's it. Penelope's convinced and they reunite. She doesn't test him again, does she, in the movie? So that's big. In the ancient account, she's still not satisfied after he's killed the suitors. If I'm getting my chronology of the story right, remembering correctly, she has to fake him out by asking for their great bed to be moved. And he says, "Wait, you can't move that bed. It's anchored down by the trunk of an
Oh,
oak tree," at which she was used to test him. And that's when she's finally sold. And the idea behind that is that just as Telemachus is growing up to become the hero Odysseus, Penelope is his female heroic counterpart. She's as clever as she is. She's as steadfast as she is, not giving in to the suitors, standing up to them all these years. She's clever, crafty, suspicious, all of the things that Odysseus is. So she makes a great counterpart to him, or a great partner, as the queen and his wife, and his beloved, right? But did they have that in the
yeah.
movie?
So
I
I
see. There
I was
was.
gonna they didn't they changed it instead
Oh,
of
okay.
having the bed. They had the pendant
Oh, the
Remember she had the
pen.
little pendant
That's
thing?
yeah.
That was their substitute for it.
Okay, well, maybe just to simplify, because it would take too long. Just I don't know,
The
but
the bed is made out of woven
yeah,
tree.
yeah,
It's in
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Or maybe with their
too much.
practical sets, it would have cost too much to have the bed with a tree. Well, of course, you
Yeah,
didn't have to show it. She just has to describe it. But yeah, you're. Oh yeah. So it's the
it's the
pendant that she
pendant
test. Yeah, is the
she
final
tests,
test.
yeah.
Okay. Well.
Well,
Yeah.
but she
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
I believe she does the pendant test. Does she do it before Odysseus fights the
That's why
Suitors in the
I'm
movie?
kind of misremembering a little the
I don't
chronology of this.
remember
But
if
yeah.
he gives her
That.
the pendant. I think he does give her the pendant before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it's in the scene where the older one recognizes
Yeah.
him. He says still under the Cinna impersonation, he says that Odysseus always wore this pendant, and she's like, "Oh, describe it to
Oh
me." And
yeah.
he's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it looked like X, Y, and Z." And then I
Right.
think he
Right.
gives her the pendant
But that.
after,
Oh, after. Okay, I was
or
gonna say
maybe
no, maybe before, because just as he's still if he still has Sinon, then he's not. Then he hasn't fired the. Has he fired the strung the bow and fired the
no,
arrows?
no, no.
Because maybe that's the proof she needs. Independence not enough, or so, I don't know. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I don't know.
but okay,
I don't remember which
again,
order.
I
Because I
can
know
let
he
you go.
tells
But,
her about the pendant when he gets recognized by
uh,
the older nurse, but I don't remember if he gives it to her then. I don't think so, because he just tells her about it. I think he gives it to her after he does everything else.
all right. Well,
But
see,
I
that's
don't
why
remember.
the see the one other.
Because
Yeah,
she knows it's him when he strings the bow, because she knows that like
well,
shit's about to go down, and she closes the doors.
yeah, and well, and she
I
clearly wants him to be able to do it, right?
Yeah.
At that point, but this brings up one final thing in that, which now I'm just about forgetting I was at it here. What was I gonna say?
We're gonna talk about Helen.
No, I can. Oh, about the repeated viewings. Yes,
Oh,
about maybe the film's better than I think it is just on first viewing, because great art, and that's the thing about like the ancient Greek stories is the first time I remember when I was young, man, and I read the Iliad. Why does everybody say it's so great? It's okay, but but of course, having become a scholar of ancient history and read it many times and teaching it, now I know why it's so great. Each time you read it, you see a little something else that you didn't catch before, and so oh, that connects with that, and oh yeah, okay, I see the and the same thing goes with the Odyssey too, right? And so maybe Nolan's film, maybe it is great art, and maybe some of these things escape me, because one example of this that I didn't really catch or understand or was the scar on Helen's face, right? Like, why did he choose to have a scar, right? And I saw some blurb on the internet. Oh, maybe that's to symbolize again the toll of war. That this is her battles. What the war? It's a symbolic to show that the war has scarred her as well, and even if not physically, emotionally, whatever, right? And so and this, like with the sirens, because that was clear when on first watching the film, that the sirens do more in the movie than they do in the actual Odyssey. So that he talks, he's like, what did they sing, what did they say? And he's like, it's everything you always wanted, and things you lost too, right? And so that's that veteran thing, what he's what the costs of the war on this guy, and and so
I actually, the funny thing is,
yeah,
I didn't really hear the dialogue during this
yeah,
time. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying. What I got from it without hearing the dialogue was that it was like one of those. I thought it was one of those things where it was like so sweet that like, but he felt really guilty about it, because like, oh, I'm getting to hear this like incredibly sweet song that's everything I wanted, but I left so many men to die and blah blah blah. Committed this like low key war crime, and I feel so guilty about that I can't enjoy like this sweet song is all only sorrow to my
well,
ears.
but that's fine. That's why even if I didn't hear it right,
Yeah.
that the point being,
I know.
Nolan uses the siren song to bring out that loss
Yeah.
that was caused by the war, whether it be loss of his innocence, if he ever, if Odysseus had any innocence, but just going too far with the Trojan horse and everything. But see, that's another example of the lack of the crafting. Did I miss this? But in the film, you see the Trojan horse. You know that this was Odysseus' idea. It's pretty clear in the movie, but you don't get a sense of the deviousness and the craftiness that he came up with this plan. It just happens basically. And Odysseus, okay, he was the guy who came up with this, so he must be clever. But I didn't get the feel of that so much, you know. But okay, but that aside, um, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
what
yeah,
about the
yeah,
Trojan
yeah,
Horse?
yeah,
I
yeah,
actually did really appreciate how the movie twisted the narrative on it, and because in the Odyssey, it is so built up to be like the heroic thing Odysseus did.
yeah.
It is like the thing that won the war. It is the act that changed the course of history. And in the movie The Odyssey, Nolan totally turns it on its head as like a war crime that he committed, feels guilty
Yeah,
about, did win the war, but in turn so wrecked civilization
right.
that he will now usher in the dark age that plagued Greece for what, like
Right.
400
Right.
years after.
Was I
Uh,
wrong at one point when they refer to the sea peoples? Do they say we are the sea peoples?
they
Right.
do, and that's what I was about to
Because
talk
that
about.
actually historically, right?
Historically,
You
they've
know,
now
the
found that that is the truth.
Greeks were
Yes,
probably and Mycenaean Greeks were probably among the sea
among the sea
people. I mean,
peoples.
certainly the Paliset, the settle in Palestine. We now know from DNA evidence that there's probably Greeks, some of them, and they melded with the existing population there.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
also make this point in the movie that, he says something to the effect of, "When I made the Trojan horse and violated the sanctity of the laws of Troy, I violated the sanctity also of my own household," and the parallel between, the Trojans letting in the
Right,
Trojan
and the
horse and the
suitors, yes,
suitors
yes,
entering
yes, yes,
his own
yeah,
palace.
yeah.
And I think that that is a parallel the original Odyssey does not make,
Mm.
which Nolan does, and I do really like how he string
Well,
that together.
I mean, the original Odyssey might, yeah, I'd have
I
to read it through again
Yeah.
closely.
I don't think but I don't think it does. It might have made the parallel a little bit, but I don't think it comes anywhere near the emphasis Nolan puts on the
But
Trojan horse
he
specifically.
definitely, yeah,
Well, not
emphasized,
again,
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
specifically
yeah,
being a war crime. Like, I
yeah,
think the impression I got anyway upon reading the original Odyssey, and yes, it was years ago, so I don't
yeah.
remember the exact particulars, but the feeling I know I came away with was that the Trojan horse was this mythical deed of epic proportions. The way Nolan depicts it makes it feel like it's kinda like dropping a nuke
Yeah,
despite being an
yeah,
epic invention.
right,
It's like
yeah,
Hitler using
yeah,
chemical
yeah,
warfare.
chemical weapons,
It's like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
like, yeah, it
yeah.
won you the war, but oh, we don't like, oh, it's
But this
lame.
this is why, like I said, it's hard to know exactly how the ancient Greeks themselves felt about this because, like I said, on the one hand, they put heroism on a pedestal and winning wars is what matters, but at the same time, they were aware of the brutality. I mean, you read like the Iliad and Homer, he makes it abundantly clear how brutal it is, and it's kind of ambiguous in terms of the degree to which it's celebrated and the degree to which it's kind of sad. The brutality of war in it, and there's the famous Mykonos vase from like what around 600
Yeah.
BCE, which has this crude relief, archaic style, depiction of the Trojan horse and the sack of Troy. That's unbelievably brutal, and I can't see that as just celebrating the brutality. It looks like the kids being like bashed against walls and taken from their mothers. That there's like some like questioning of how brutal this was. So that might not be as modern, a theme as maybe we're thoughts
That's
about it here. Yeah.
fair, but I still think the emphasis that Nolan puts on it does really bring it out in a way that I hadn't thought about, hadn't felt reading the original
Oh, and I would
Odyssey.
agree with that. He definitely
And
emphasizes it a
and it
lot.
it definitely turned
Yeah.
it on its head somewhat to
Yeah.
me because when you do think about it, it's like, yeah, you like put that in today's context and it would be a Geneva Convention defying act. Like, you would
Yeah.
call
Yeah.
that war,
Yeah.
like a straight up war crime. Like, that is inhumane,
Right.
and yeah, you want a war doing it, but at what cost? And I think that's a good question to ask when you look at the more, I guess, the Iliad. But yeah.
Yeah. No, but again, this is why the movie. So I might change my opinion about this on further viewings. Maybe I'll catch things I didn't catch before and see a sort of a continuity, in the themes throughout it and how they're brought out. Because again, I do think Nolan's a great filmmaker. I don't know if this got cut out or not, but about how Inception, Oppenheimer, these are great films in my opinion. Um, you know, I'd like even some of his not as great films are still really good. And we'll see what happens when I view it again. But I think we're out of time here. So there's more I'm sure we could say, more than I'm sure everybody else has said and will say about the movie. But we got to go.
Yeah. See you
All
next
right.
time.
So long. Bye.